Welcome back to Apex Ascend. This is where we teach lions how to rise and roar. And you are a lion, so go out there and let your voice be heard. My name is Rodney LaBruce, and I'm the host of this podcast. And if this is your first time joining us, you're in for something deeper than just headlines. Today, we're not just unpacking history, we're unpacking a pattern of denial, a pattern of sanitized stories, and of silence where there should be screams. Today, I want to continue to make a case for reparations to the African American descendants of slaves. That's you and that's me. And in order to do that, we're going to start off talking about the hidden horrors of medical experimentation. We're also going to touch on the backlash against minority progress. And we're going to talk about the slow, turtle-like march of that thing we call cultural change. And we're also going to end it all with how a simple childhood lesson on the Alamo, you remember that? How it was really a masterclass in whitewashed mythology. Why are we going to talk about all of this? Because if we don't confront the lies, we will inherit the consequences. And if we don't tell the truth somehow, some way, how can we expect to ever heal? In an interview with Robert Penn Warren in 1964, Malcolm X said it best, and I quote, "If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. You pull it out all of the way. That's not progress. The progress is healing the wound that the blow made." And they haven't even pulled the knife out, much less heal the wound. They won't even admit the knife is still there. So today, let's get into it. Let's make sure that they, you, and everybody else knows that the knife is still stuck in the backs of every African American descendant of slaves. Imagine, if you will, that you are a young woman named Lucy. You're a slave and you have no rights and you have no consent. And here comes a doctor named Marion Sims who decides that you will be his next test subject. And during the process of testing on you, there's no anesthesia, there's no pain relief. And he even goes on to write about you in his memoirs. He says that Lucy's agony was extreme. I thought she was going to die. But still, he kept going again and again and again. Between 1845 and 1849, Sims performed a series of experimental surgeries to treat a condition, a severe complication of childbirth that causes urine to leak into the vaginal canal, and it causes incontinence and infection. So Sims operated on at least 10 slaves, black women. One was named Anarcha, another was named Betsy, and then, of course, there were Lucy and others. The surgeries were experimental. There was no anesthesia. There was no sort of pain relief because they believed that black women simply felt less pain. But the pain was so intense that some white doctors even refused to help them. Sims operated on Anarcha at least 30 times before developing a successful surgical technique. And so they go on to call Dr. Sims the father of modern gynecology. And this is an ancient history. A statue of him stood in New York City up until 2018. Let that sink in. But there are more. experiments. 600 black men in Alabama. 399 of them had syphilis, but they were never told. They were never treated, even after penicillin became available. This what was known as the Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment. The United States government even stood by and watched them all die. They tracked their bodies. They took notes. One official said later that the men's status did not warrant ethical debate. They were simply subjects, not patients. This was not a rogue operation. This was federal. Back in 1997, the President of the United States, President Clinton, he formally apologized for this. But how do you repair a century's worth of bodily exploitation? But yet, it does not stop there. In the 1990s, Black and Latino boys in New York were given a substance, a drug called fenfluramine. This drug was linked to heart issues. And they were given this drug in an experiment about aggression. They were only about 6 to 10 years old. They had to fast. They had to be catheterized. They were drugged. They had their blood drawn repeatedly. Again, these were 6 to 10-year-old boys. In Harlem, Black foster children were enrolled in HIV drug trials without proper consent. Some experienced even horrific side effects. And then there's Henrietta Lacks, poor Black woman who simply went in for cancer treatment in 1951. And without her knowledge and without her consent even, the doctors took her cells, her what would later become known as HeLa cells, became the foundation of modern medicine. It's used in everything from polio vaccine to cancer research. She, her family, got nothing, not even an apology. And again, this is not just history. This is a living legacy.
Imagine something small enough to float on a particle of dust that holds the keys to understanding cancer, virology, and genetics. Luckily for us, such a thing exists in the form of trillions upon trillions of human lab-grown cells called HeLa. Let's take a step back for a second. Scientists grow human cells in the lab to study how they function, understand how diseases develop, and test new treatments without endangering patients. To make sure that they can repeat these experiments over and over and compare the results with other scientists, they need huge populations of identical cells that can duplicate themselves faithfully for years. But until 1951, all human cell lines that researchers tried to grow had died after a few days. Then a Johns Hopkins scientist named George Guy received a sample of a strange-looking tumor. Dark purple, shiny, jelly-like. This sample was special. Some of its cells just kept dividing and dividing and dividing. When individual cells died, generations of copies took their place and thrived. The result was an endless source of identical cells that's still around today, the very first immortal human cell line. Guy labeled it HeLa after the patient with the unusual tumor, Henrietta Lacks. Born on a tobacco farm in Virginia, she lived in Baltimore with her husband and 5 children. She died of aggressive cervical cancer a few months after her tumor's cells were harvested, and she never knew about them. So what's so special about the cells from Henrietta Lacks that lets them survive when other cell lines die? The short answer is, we don't entirely know. Normal human cells have built-in control mechanisms. They can divide about 50 times before they self-destruct in a process called apoptosis. This prevents the propagation of genetic errors that creep in after repeated rounds of division. But cancer cells ignore these signals, dividing indefinitely and crowding out normal cells. Still, most cell lines eventually die off, especially outside the human body. Not HeLa, though, and that's the part we can't yet explain. Regardless, when Dr. Guy realized he had the first immortal line of human cells, he sent samples to labs all over the world. Soon the world's first cell production facility was churning out 6 trillion HeLa cells a week, and scientists put them to work, in an ethically problematic way, building careers and fortunes off of Henrietta's cells without her or her family's consent, or even knowledge until decades later. The polio epidemic was at its peak in the early 50s. HeLa cells, which easily took up and replicated the virus, allowed Jonas Salk to test his vaccine. They've been used to study diseases including measles, mumps, HIV, and Ebola. We know that human cells have 46 chromosomes because a scientist working with HeLa discovered a chemical that makes chromosomes visible. HeLa cells themselves actually have around 80 highly mutated chromosomes. HeLa cells were the first to be cloned. They've traveled to outer space. Telomerase, an enzyme that helps cancer cells evade destruction by repairing their DNA, was discovered first in HeLa cells. In an interesting turn of fate, thanks to HeLa, we know that cervical cancer can be caused by a virus called HPV, and now there's a vaccine. HeLa-fueled discoveries have filled thousands of scientific papers, and that number is probably even higher than anyone knows. HeLa cells are so resilient that they can travel on almost any surface. A lab worker's hand, a piece of dust, invading cultures of other cells and taking over like weeds. Countless cures, patents, and discoveries, all made thanks to Henrietta Lacks.
We see it today in how Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from childbirth complications. Serena Williams nearly died from doctors ignoring her pain. We see it in the algorithms that prioritize white patients, in the clinical trials that simply leave us out. We see it, and we will remember it, because reparations aren't just about money, they're about dignity, recognition, and ultimately about justice. Now let me take you back to 1865. Slavery had just ended. Hope was rising, and in comes the new president, President Andrew Johnson, who said, if the Negroes are to be elevated, you must educate the white man more, or he will be overtaken. Now, honestly, that wasn't a fringe opinion. That was the voice of the President of the United States. That fear that you hear in that statement, well, it never left. It just put on a suit and got more polite. Every time Black people advanced in history, Black and brown people, there was a counterattack. We built towns, they burnt them down. We voted, they made literacy tests. We got civil rights, they gave us the war on drugs. We integrated schools, they fled to private ones. Progress equals backlash. It's not just racism, it's resource protection. Unfortunately, some folks view equity as loss, as if power is a pie, and our gain is their slice that's shrinking. You see it in how people react to affirmative action. You see it when someone says diversity, the other person hears threat. We're not just trying to take over, we're trying to level the floor. That's all. But Chief Justice Roberts once wrote, "The way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race." I know that sounds tidy, but it ignores the foundation everything was built on. You can't paint over rot and call it restored. Equity isn't about revenge, it's about repair, full and total restoration. So the question is, how long until it gets better? I know that you and I have seen progress. You've seen 2 steps forward and 1 step backward. But how long until the pain stops repeating itself? So when we look at that question, I kind of draw a line in the sand, and that line is drawn in 1965. That's when the Voting Rights Act was passed. That's when federal law finally seemed to tilt, even ever so slightly, toward justice. Before that, everything was built to favor oppression. But the legal change isn't the same as cultural change. Sociologists say that it takes 3 to 5 generations, that's 75 to 125 years, to fully shift culture. So when you think of it in those terms, where the line is drawn in 1965, we would be in generation 3. The first generation lived from 65 to 90, and they lived the resistance, the busing riots, the redlining, the voter suppression. And then there was the second generation that was born in the years between 90 and 2015. They heard the term colorblind, while prisons swelled with Black and brown men. And now, in this age, being born are generation 3. So we now have the first real shot to make equity a shared value. But, and I say that but word loudly, but if we do the work. Look at Germany. After World War II, they banned Nazi symbols. They taught the Holocaust in schools. They forced a national reckoning of the behaviors and the actions that took place during World War II. And how about us? We let Confederate flags fly freely across the nation. We let statues stay in place. And we even let textbooks continue to tell the vicious lies that distort our very history. We have never re-educated. We just rebranded the resistance. So now it's on us. The line has been drawn in the sand. What will we do? I remember in 7th grade, I learned about the Alamo. I learned about the heroism, the bravery, the stand for freedom and liberty. I not saw the complete movie, but I knew that one existed where it had John Wayne in it. They had the muskets and the glorious stand where "Remember the Alamo" would be chanted all through history. But in 7th grade, nobody told me the truth. Nobody told me Mexico had abolished slavery. Nobody told me that the settlers in Texas fighting at the Alamo wanted to keep owning people. The Texas Revolution wasn't just about freedom and liberty. It was about keeping human bondage alive. The cry was not, give me liberty or give me death. It was, give me my slaves or we go to war. Imagine if today, in today's world, Canadians moved to Alaska. They set up a territory in Alaska and began to break United States of America laws. And then they would have the audacity to revolt against the United States in order to protect their way of life in our country. Would we call them heroes? But that's what the Alamo was. You had illegal settlers resisting anti-slavery laws. But no, in 7th grade, I didn't learn that. And still, I don't believe that we teach that. Because if we did, we'd have to question every monument and every myth and every story that's written in the history books. We'd have to come face to face with the lies that we've told and continue to tell not only our children, but ourselves. So where does that leave us? What do we do with the trauma, with the pain, with the hurt? More importantly, what do we do with the truth? Well, we face it, we fight through it, and we rise like we always have and like we always will. Medical abuse, cultural fear, systemic resistance, historical revisionism, they're all branches of the same tree. And the roots are a nation that's terrified of equity. But we're not asking for dominance, my black and brown brothers. We're simply demanding justice. That means reparations. That means education. That means building coalitions across lines they've spent centuries trying to keep divided. This podcast isn't just here to inform, it's here to ignite, hopefully. And if you're listening, I challenge you. Learn the history they left out. Question the narratives you grew up with. Support the policies that repair what was broken. But most importantly, don't listen and look at what's going on around you as just your source of entertainment, but get involved. You are a lion. Let your voice be heard. Because this is generation 3 that we're in. This is our shot. If we are going to see that change that we all talked about, sung about, prayed for, then we're going to have to finally do something about it. Let's not waste our opportunity. Let's rise, let's roar, and let's go on and see how the end's going to end.
You feel, however, that we're making progress in this country and worldwide?
No. I will never say that progress is being made. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. You pull it all the way out, that's not progress. The progress is healing the wound that's a blow made. And they haven't even begun to pull a knife out, much less try and heal the wound. They won't even admit the knife is there.